Did you know that just this week, a really rare executive maneuver, something unseen in almost 50 years, kind of shook up how your tax dollars get spent overseas?
Yeah, we're talking about President Trump's use of a pocket rescission. He used it to cancel an extra $4.9 billion in foreign aid.
Okay, so for anyone not familiar, what is a pocket rescission exactly? And why is this one causing, well, such a stir?
That's a really key question. Um, Basically, a pocket rescission is when the president sends Congress a proposal to cancel funding, but does it less than 45 days before the fiscal year actually ends.
Ah, so the timing is crucial.
Exactly. The idea is to run out the clock, right? So Congress doesn't have the time needed to vote against the cuts. It effectively tries to sidestep their authority.
And this isn't the first cut recently, is it?
No, not at all. This comes right after a successful rescission bill back in July 2025. That one cut $9.4 billion from foreign aid and also, interestingly, public broadcasting.
So these aren't isolated incidents then?
Definitely not. Both of these moves are, well, they're pieces of a much larger strategy, conservative-driven agenda.
Right. So today we're going to take a deep dive into this whole complex world. Federal government downsizing, foreign aid reform, those constitutional debates about presidential spending power that are flaring up.
Yeah, our mission is really to pull out the most important insights from what's happening right now and look at the core arguments driving these changes.
Exactly. We want to give you a clear picture of what's going on and importantly why.
And these actions, they really stem from a pretty clear, broader vision for the federal government.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, central to it is the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they call it.
EOGE, right?
Yeah, its job is basically to pinpoint ways to cut bureaucracy and, wasteful spending, working directly with the president and the Office of Management and Budget. It's like a top-down rethink of how government works.
And what's fueling this rethink? I understand the Cato Institute points to some core problems.
That's right. They talk about three uncomfortable truths that they argue make reform absolutely necessary.
Okay, uncomfortable truths. What's the first one?
Well, the first is about government failure. The argument is, look, the government often just doesn't achieve what it sets out to do. And maybe more importantly, they argue overregulation actually holds back economic growth. It stops market solutions from, working properly.
So it's not just inefficiency, it's actively harmful in their view.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
It's a belief that government trying to do too much actually hurts prosperity.
And that seems to link to the second truth, which sounds, well, pretty serious.
It does. The second truth warns of a looming fiscal crisis. The concern is that government debt is historically high and is projected to, quote, explode to unprecedented levels.
Explode.
Yeah. And the risk, they say, is high inflation, slower growth, and even federal default. So the insight here is that these aren't just abstract numbers on a page. They're seen as an existential threat to the economy.
Okay, so government failure, fiscal crisis. What's the third uncomfortable truth?
The third one focuses on bureaucratic overreach and, well, inefficiency. The view is that the federal government has just become this unwieldy and blunt instrument. It tries to do too much, they argue.
And that leads to?
Inevitably, they say, it leads to significant waste, fraud, and corruption. What's really insightful about this critique, I think, is the claim that the sheer size and scope of government itself is the problem, not just, a few bad apples.
So if those are the problems they identify, what are the guiding principles for fixing them? What's the roadmap for reform look like?
The principles are pretty clear-cut. First, a strong commitment to constitutionally limited government. The federal government should only do what the Constitution explicitly says it can.
Stick to the script, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Second, a big push for less regulation, often using executive orders to roll back rules made in the past. Then the goal of a smaller, more effective bureaucracy, and of course, big cuts to government spending.
Especially targeting certain areas.
Yes, particularly what they call runaway entitlement programs, like Social Security and Medicare. That's a major focus.
And it's not just about cutting, is it? There's talk about taxes, too.
Absolutely. Tax efficiency is key. The goal is a simpler tax code, lower rates, and getting rid of special interest deductions. The whole package, really, is aimed at achieving fiscal stability and boosting the economy by, well, getting government out of the way more.
Okay, these broad principles for shrinking the government logically bring us to a specific area that's seen very recent action, foreign aid. I think for a lot of people, foreign aid means humanitarian help, like pure charity.
Right. That's a common perception.
But the sources we looked at paint a much more complex picture for the U.S., right? Where aid is maybe less about just giving and more about strategy.
That's exactly it. Foreign aid is presented as a complex tool. It's used for strategic influence, maybe to secure votes at the UN or get permission for military bases somewhere important.
And supporting allies.
Definitely. It plays a big role in backing allied governments, think Iraq or Israel, and also directly pushing back against rivals like China or Russia. There's also this interesting historical angle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how long-term aid investments actually helped turn former enemies like Germany and Japan after World War II into really close allies. It shows its potential for, reshaping geopolitics over time.
But there's a very strong, very vocal conservative critique of foreign aid right now. One big point seems to be about inefficiency and a lack of transparency. What's the argument there?
Well, critics, including some economists like William Easterly and Raghuram Rajan, point to studies suggesting there's no relationship or negative relationship between economic assistance and growth and development in recipient nations.
Really? No relationship or negative?
That's what their research suggests. They argue that things like market liberalization opening up economies are often much more effective for growth. So it raises real questions about whether billions in taxpayer money are actually achieving the intended results.
And those figures on overhead costs and accountability you mentioned earlier, they were pretty stark.
They really are. There are major concerns about aid money just being, siphoned off by corrupt officials in other countries. Senator Joni Ernst did an investigation in 2023.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, it found that apparently half of aid funds are spent on overhead. Half. And then a 2024 government audit found USA, the main agency, could not account for $142.5 billion in overhead charges.
Wow, $142.5 billion unaccounted for.
That's the finding reported.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing really fuels the argument that a lot of aid maybe just gets lost in bureaucracy or doesn't reach the people it's supposed to help.
Beyond the money aspect, there's another major line of criticism focusing on what gets called woke or politically biased programs. The argument is that USAI has sort of drifted from its original mission.
Right. The original mission being things like countering communism, disaster relief. The accusation now is that it's shifted, especially under the Biden administration, towards promoting what critics call radical social agendas.
Okay, like what specifically? What kind of programs are being targeted?
Well, the examples given include promoting ideologies related to population control, LGBTQ plus issues, and abortion. For instance, PEPFAR, that's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's been argued that it's become an LGBTQ plus and abortion promotion program filled with fraud.
And there were specific incidents cited?
Yes. There were reports between 2021 and 2023 about corrupt officials in Zambia allegedly taking PEPFAR medicines. And in 2024, the CDC reportedly found 4 nurses in Mozambique performing abortions while getting PEPFAR grants. There were also cuts mentioned to global health accounts for LGBTQ plus programs that promoted things like intersex and queer global movements.
This also taps into debates you see online, right? Like on Reddit, where people question sending aid to countries where the government or population seems anti-American. They ask, is it working? Or is it just wasted money? Or maybe even breeding resentment?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the public conversation you see. Of course, it's crucial to note, proponents of foreign aid would strongly push back. They'd argue these programs, despite challenges, meet vital long-term strategic goals, important humanitarian needs, and that these criticisms maybe oversimplify or misrepresent the overall impact.
A really important distinction to keep in mind. Okay, so this all brings us back to the mechanics of how these cuts are being made, these presidential spending powers. Let's talk about rescission bills first. How do they work?
Okay, so a rescission bill is a specific process. The president sends a proposal to Congress. This pauses the spending on certain funds for 45 days.
Just pauses it initially.
Right. Then, if Congress passes a rescission bill within that time, and it's a special expedited process, no filibuster, just a simple majority vote needed, then those funds are officially canceled, permanently. It actually replaced a broader power presidents used to have before 1974 to just sort of impound funds.
And President Trump used this successfully just recently in June 2025, cutting $9.4 billion. And a big target there was the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB. Why go after public broadcasting?
Well, the argument for cutting CPB focus on its $535 million annual funding. Critics say it's unnecessary now, right, with all the private media options. They point to things like Sesame Street being on HBO or Netflix now.
So the media landscape has changed.
Exactly. Plus, there are accusations of political bias, specifically radical left-wing bias, against outlets like NPR and PBS. One study mentioned looked at the PBS NewsHour.
Yeah.
It reportedly found a 3.7-to-1 ratio of liberal Democrat guests compared to conservative Republican guests between late 2022 and early 2023. And that apparently jumped to 5.7-to-1 when you took out elected officials.
What about the argument that CPB funds essential services, like emergency alerts?
Critics acknowledge that, but argue that function could just be funded separately, maybe by FEMA or NOAA, without needing to subsidize the entire CPB operation and its, potentially biased content.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's get back to that even more controversial tool, the pocket rescission, the one used just this August.
Right, the pocket rescission. So, again, this happens when the president sends that rescission proposal, but crucially, less than 45 days before the fiscal year ends on September 30th.
The timing again?
Yes. The whole point is to bypass Congress's chance to disapprove within that 45-day window. Basically, let the clock run out on them.
That really sounds like it sets up a major clash, constitutionally speaking. What's the legal fight about?
Oh, it's a huge conflict. Critics absolutely call it an illegal impoundment. They say the 1974 law that set up rescission bills didn't provide for this pocket version. They argue it violates Congress's constitutional power of the purse.
Has anyone official weighed in?
Yes. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, actually ruled pocket rescissions illegal back in 2018. And even Republican Senator Susan Collins called it a clear violation of the law.
But the administration disagrees.
Strongly. Supporters, including the OMB and the White House, insist they are on very firm legal footing. They point to historical precedents, like President Carter using some limited pocket rescissions.
So it really highlights that ongoing tension, that tug of war between the president and Congress over spending, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like a constitutional chess game playing out over billions. And this is probably heading towards the Supreme Court, wouldn't you think?
Seems likely.
Especially with the current administration, there's this idea that the court might lean towards legitimizing these actions under something called the unitary executive theory.
Explain that theory briefly.
Basically, it suggests the president has broad, almost supreme authority over the executive branch. It would give him wide latitude to push his agenda, potentially with less need for congressional approval.
And Trump's August pocket rescission of that extra $4.9 billion for climate and gender programs, that's the test case now.
It seems to be. It definitely sparked immediate legal challenges. And actually, the Department of Justice has already asked the Supreme Court to clarify the executive branch's power over foreign aid disputes, even bringing up historical examples like Thomas Jefferson withholding funds. So yeah, it's a live, very significant constitutional debate.
Okay, so beyond these specific spending cuts and battles, there's this much broader vision for reforming the whole federal bureaucracy. Let's touch on federal workers first. What are the concerns and proposed changes there?
The main critique revolves around two things: high compensation and low accountability. Figures from 2023 show federal civilian workers earned, on average, $157,000 in wages and benefits.
Compared to the private sector.
Significantly higher. The private sector average was around $94,000. Combine that with low quit rates and low firing rates, and the argument is it creates a kind of sclerotic culture infected with groupthink.
So what's the proposed fix?
Proposals include cutting employee benefits. They estimate a 10% cut could save $40 billion a year. Also, downsizing federal employment itself, another potential $40 billion annual saving with a 10% cut. Plus, ideas like limiting federal unions, making it easier to fire underperforming employees, and ending affirmative action in federal hiring and contracting to boost, merit-based accountability.
And then there's the idea of privatization and transferring assets. What's the thinking behind that?
The core argument is pretty simple. If a federal activity can pay for itself through customer revenue, maybe it belongs in the private sector where, presumably, competition would make it more efficient.
What kind of things are being suggested?
Well, examples often mentioned include Amtrak, the Postal Service, the Air Traffic Control System, even the Tennessee Valley Authority. It also extends to federal lands, suggestions to sell or transfer lands managed by, say, the Bureau of Land Management, or maybe less visited national parks, to states or private groups for more local management.
And regulatory reform is a big piece too, right? What's the goal there?
Yeah, the main goal is to reduce what they see as financial costs on Americans and barriers to business growth. Proposals include things like requiring Congress to approve all major new regulations and putting sunset clauses on rules so they automatically expire unless renewed.
Are there specific areas targeted for deregulation?
Oh, yes. Financial markets are a big one, like repealing the Dodd-Frank Act. Energy is another, even proposing to get rid of the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Healthcare, too, with ideas like abolishing some FDA powers and repealing Obamacare. And even things like maritime laws, like the Jones Act, which critics say makes domestic shipping way too expensive.
Wow, those are huge structural changes. And this reform vision extends to the biggest budget items too, like entitlements and taxes. For Social Security, what's on the table?
Some significant proposals there. Things like slowing how fast benefits grow by linking them to prices instead of wages, uh, modernizing how cost of living adjustments are calculated, raising eligibility ages for retirement, and even moving towards a flat benefit system focused mainly on preventing poverty. These would have massive impacts on future retirees.
And on the tax side.
The proposals include slashing the corporate income tax rate, allowing businesses to immediately deduct all investment costs, cutting individual tax rates, and repealing, they estimate, over $1.4 trillion in annual tax loopholes and subsidies.
Healthcare spending is also targeted.
Yes, big time. Proposals to cut Medicare spending by a third, convert Medicaid and CHIP into block grants for states with no growth factored in, and even privatizing the Veterans Health Administration. Really fundamental shifts in federal healthcare funding.
Education funding too, it seems.
Right. Proposals aim to eliminate federal involvement in funding in both higher education, things like financial aid, DEI initiatives, and K-12 education, potentially cutting the Department of Education Title I grants, Head Start.
And finally, subsidies across the board.
A huge target. The goal is eliminating potentially over 2,400 subsidy programs. Agriculture, broadband, specific industry supports like for semiconductors, even critiques of junk food subsidies within the SNAP Food Assistance Program. The argument is they distort markets and create dependency.
And one last thing, reining in emergency spending.
Yeah, proposals there include requiring any new emergency spending to be offset by cuts elsewhere, making it harder to pass emergency bills by raising voting thresholds and putting tighter limits on presidential emergency declarations. It's really a comprehensive package aimed at fundamentally reshaping government finance and operations.
So wrapping this up, we've really seen today how this conservative agenda, especially visible under the current administration, is driving a deep, deep reevaluation of federal spending and power.
Absolutely. From questioning the whole purpose of foreign aid to testing the legal limits of presidential rescissions, there's this undeniable tension. It's established government practices versus a push for, well, what they see as greater fiscal responsibility, adherence to the Constitution, and economic efficiency.
And these aren't just abstract policy debates, are they?
Not at all. These deep cuts, these reforms, they could really change how your tax dollars are used, how the government itself functions day to day, and even America's footprint on the world stage. It's definitely about more than just budget numbers. It's about the fundamental principles intended to guide the nation's future.
So as we think about all these sweeping changes, streamlining bureaucracy, reshaping foreign policy, altering how major social programs are funded, the question for you to consider is, how do you think these proposed reductions in federal power and spending will actually impact the daily lives of Americans for the next generation?